back here on the show for the last segment of today's episode. We're going to talk about more on Stefon Diggs and what his contract is looking like right now. It was sort of developing later on after Wednesday when it all broke down and people figuring out why he was traded for what he was traded. The Texans actually restructured his deal a little bit. He was scheduled to start his new 4-year deal with the Buffalo Bills, obviously before he was traded. Now with the Texans, that 4-year, $70 million deal, I think it was, that total amount. But now, after the trade, the Texans restructured that deal and actually voided the final 3 years of that new contract that they gave him. And that $22.5 million is going to be guaranteed to Stefon Diggs in his first year, 2024, this year coming up. And it will give him the opportunity to be a free agent in 2025. So, a lot it can be taken from that, restructuring his deal. Really a prove-it year to expiring deal to more motivated Stefon Diggs is a way that you can put this transaction being done, voiding those final 3 years. Before I've mentioned on this topic that, you have to think big picture, long term with this team. A lot of players on the Texans are younger than Stefon Diggs. Stefon Diggs is now 30. Still a very good receiver. I think he's going to do very well in Houston and going to do a lot for them, like I've talked about on previous episodes. But to have him there for 4 more years at the amount of money he's making, this deal seems like the right decision for a few reasons. The positives of this, you can get a more motivated Stefon Diggs, a prove-it year, like I mentioned, having that 1 year. If it doesn't work out with Houston, if he balls out and goes crazy, like I still believe he can, the capability of having that in him, I still think he does. And doing that, he goes off this year. They make it to the AFC Championship this time, maybe win it, go to the Super Bowl, make the playoffs at least, and he does well. If he doesn't decide to go back with the Texans or the Texans decide they also don't want to sign him, he has a good little resume just from that year that he can provide to other teams and maybe still get a pretty significant contract, 2-year, 3-year deal, something like that, from another team that saw him perform still at 31 years old, at 30 years old, and he could have that incentive to go out there more motivated than ever. If he does go bad, he could just leave in 2025, more so on the side of the Texans, more of a positive for them. If it doesn't work out, they have no strings attached to him. They can let him go, and they don't really lose too much with bringing him in right now. They could definitely only do more good than bad at this point for the Texans. And also, just combining those two scenarios, if Diggs balls out, they do very well. Why couldn't he stay on the Houston Texans? That's also still an option. Restructure his deal again, or give him a new deal, I should say. A 2-year, 3-year sort of thing that keeps him in Houston if they really like him, if he has great chemistry with CJ Stroud, has a good relationship in the locker room. It's all positive with him. He produces. I can't see why they can't work out another deal. Cheaper, probably, the Texans would want to go, but that's also still an option as a positive. On the negative side of things, how much can Houston really get out of him in this short 1-year deal, trying to adapt to his new scenarios, adapt to CJ Stroud and how different he throws the ball than Josh Allen, the timing of it all, how well and how flawlessly can you execute those things in just 1 year. It definitely won't get to the relationship that he had with Allen, but I think it could go well enough because he isn't the only receiver there. Nico Collins, Tank Dell are there. Stefon Diggs can take a little bit longer and not have to be relied upon so much. But that is a question right now. How much can you really get out of him in 1 year to the fullest extent? Also, we've seen the outbursts. We've seen him have some issues on the sideline in the locker room and stuff like that with Allen, the pent-up frustration. Could those problems carry over? Some people will have those questions. I don't think so much. I think it just had to do with the situation, specifically in Buffalo, how good they could have been, but it always just seemed like something was holding them back or they weren't really playing to the level they were capable of. I think Stefon Diggs is just frustrated from that point, only on that specific thing. Not so much to do with the kind of people that are there, the kind of relationship he had with them. I'm sure he had a great relationship with all of them, but it just boiled over with the frustration. Those are sort of the negative things that could work out. But in seeing that they restructured his deal, I thought, what teams could be out there that could fit him in 2025 if he doesn't re-sign with the Texans? I decided on 3 teams that make the most sense to me and the most sense to Diggs and how he would like to most likely finish off his career. I have 3 teams here. The first one, in my opinion, tied for the most likely situation, the best situation, could be the San Francisco 49ers. They have the issues going right now with Brandon Ayuk. His contract, are they going to extend him? Are they going to be able to afford him with the extension that he wants? The relationship seems a little bit bumpy right now between John Lynch, Kyle Shanahan, and Ayuk. Him going on social media, tweeting at Mike Tomlin, responding to something John Lynch said on his Instagram story. It doesn't seem close right now, according to multiple reports. So that's an issue. If he leaves, they're going to need a wide receiver. They're going to need more weapons for Brock Purdy, especially if, like I mentioned before on this show, they want to extend Purdy, give him a lot of money. If you're going to commit a lot of money to him, you have to make sure he can produce. Supporting him with the sort of level of supporting cast that he has been used to will only benefit them in trying to keep this run of NFC Championship games, playoff appearances going as long as possible, as long as Brock Purdy is there. You want to be able to support him as much as you can. Losing Ayuk and not doing anything about it will definitely harm this team. So looking at a Stefon Diggs maybe in 2025 on a short-term deal, 1-year deal again, 2-year deal maybe for them if they can afford it. Obviously, they had some salary cap issues this year. So that all has to be thought over and discussed, but I don't think it's the worst idea if you lose Brandon Ayuk, especially I think it could come sooner rather than later because of what I mentioned before. If you're going to lose him anyway and not extend him, he has 1 more year left on his deal. You don't want to lose him for nothing next year. If you do trade him, I think the draft would be the best option to do that. And by doing that, I think 2025 will open up this door a little bit more for the Niners to try and find another weapon if they lose Ayuk this year and realize that they're in dire need of another weapon. Then the second team that I think fits him the best probably would be the Baltimore Ravens. Stefon Diggs is from Maryland. Baltimore has always needed a wide receiver, and I know they would love to have a young, up-and-coming receiver that they develop, draft, and he becomes one of the best receivers in the league. Zay Flowers could become that. He's the closest thing that they've had to that. They always just seem to sign players or they do draft receivers, but they don't really work out as they hope. Zay Flowers is looking like the most promising one, but they would obviously love to add to that offense to complement Derrick Henry, Lamar Jackson, already an exciting duo. Mark Andrews there as well. Isaiah Likely kind of had a breakout season there towards the end. All exciting things, but just imagine if you had another receiver on top of Zay Flowers to really complete this offense. It would make them almost virtually impossible to stop. Diggs, again, I keep saying he is older, so if you want to say this could be more of an Odell situation when he signs there, being an older player, how much can he give you? I can understand that, but then again, I think Diggs at 31 years old, 32 years old, I think he could give them more production than what they've had in previous seasons. He'll provide that sort of mentor role for Zay Flowers as well. Another veteran in that locker room to really drive this team because he's more motivated than ever, it seems like, with how frustrated he gets on the sidelines and how bad he's been or how bad he wants to get to a Super Bowl and how close he's been in multiple instances with the Buffalo Bills. Adding him to the Ravens, that always just seemed to be right there, I think could get both of them over that hump, competing for a Super Bowl. So that makes the second most sense to me in that aspect. And lastly, Another team that I just want to throw in there to complete this, it still makes sense, is the Washington Commanders, close to home for Stefon Diggs in Maryland. They've addressed almost everything this offseason, really, on the defensive side, some pieces for the offensive line. What else I was going to say? Defense, and obviously Dan Quinn comes in, bringing in a new general manager, new offensive coordinator with Cliff Kingsbury, adding a lot of pieces. Running back, Austin Eckler's also there now. They've almost addressed everything except pass rusher and quarterback. They're going to address, you want to assume, this year in the draft. And now you just need another guy to finally be that 1-2 punch with Terry McLaurin. You have Jahan Dotson there. They just lost Curtis Samuel. But even with Curtis Samuel there, Jahan Dotson, Terry McLaurin was still very good, still very productive with everything, all the missing pieces, the lack of talent, if you want to say, on the Commanders. He still performs very well. Now, I definitely think they've gotten better all over in general with that roster. I have confidence in Dan Quinn to produce again as a head coach. Say they draft an exciting young quarterback, a Jaden Daniels, Drake May, J.J. McCarthy, whoever they think is best to lead their organization. Having that young quarterback there, if he performs very well, just gives more of an incentive for Stefon Diggs to look at that situation and not think so badly of it. You know, people might think going to Commanders, you want to compete for Super Bowls. If you're Stefon Diggs, what are you doing going to the Commanders? I'm pretty high on the Commanders to be better than they have been in recent years. I think they're just levels above now with Dan Quinn there, like I mentioned, and good leader. Coming from a good situation in Dallas where he had a ton of success, I think that is a whole recipe for them to definitely improve on what they have been doing. Regardless if they get Jaden Daniels, Drake May, or J.J. McCarthy, again, I think it's better than what they've had in previous years. So all of that just makes sense for Stefon Diggs to go there and be the immediate leader on that young offense, because it's going to be young either way, with Terry McLaurin to help build and mold out that offense to be very competitive in an NFC East where I definitely have questions around the Cowboys. The Eagles have addressed their offense. They're a juggernaut on offense, but defense, there's still some holes. The Giants are the Giants. So the Commanders are in a good spot right now where you don't really know what to expect of them. There's no real expectations right now. They can play with house money and really surprise a lot of people and build up these good vibes going into the next year under Dan Quinn, get him more confidence from the fans and the organization to provide him with more help. With Stefon Diggs there, I think he could add a lot to that. And I think that offense would really become pretty as close to whole as they've ever had with Diggs there, Terry McLaurin, a good quarterback. If they produce this year, it's going to just add on more to that. And those are the three teams I think best fit is for Diggs. But on the other hand, just to wrap up this whole segment, those are hypothetical options if he doesn't sign with Houston. If you're Stefon Diggs, are you going to find a better situation with Houston? You know, that thought has to come into his head at some point, I would think. If something feels off about Houston after this year, you get close, you don't make it to the Super Bowl or where you think you're going to land, are you really going to go out and look for another team that you think gives you a better chance? I find it hard to think of another team that's young, talented, and exciting, good coach, good front office, to try your luck somewhere else. That has to be a question that he really has to think about. Even if he doesn't produce well in Houston, I still think I would definitely try and renegotiate an extension for sure with Houston after this year. But again, that's a two-way street. The Texans are going to have to want him back, going back to that point I made before, a more motivated Diggs. If he produces, if he wants to stay in Houston, he'll have to produce to have them want to keep him around. And just the last thing on this topic with them, it's going to depend a lot on how early you see that chemistry with CJ Stroud and this team. He can be that leader, like I mentioned. He could add that flair and nastiness and just want to win games that you see a lot of teams in their second year, young teams, kind of struggle with. I don't think he'll let that happen. I'm very confident that this Houston Texans team can be up there competing for the best team in the AFC. Are they the best team in the AFC right now? In terms of talent, I'll say they're probably as talented as any team in the AFC. Better, the best team in the AFC, you have to factor in other things there. Experience, coaching, and stuff like that. That all we're going to have to see play out during the season. But it's going to be a very exciting season with all the moves that are just going on. I've mentioned this is one of the craziest off seasons I've seen. I'm all for it. I hope more things like this happen. And this is just the latest blockbuster thing to happen in the NFL. Just wait till the NFL draft comes around, because something always happens at the draft to shake things up. But in saying that, that'll do it for me today on the GSMC Chip Shot Football Podcast. I want to give a huge thank you to everyone listening or watching as well. Please remember to like, follow, and subscribe to the GSMC Chip Shot Football Podcast, presented by the GSMC Sports Network. Make sure to also follow the network on Facebook, Instagram, X, and TikTok for more of the network's content outside of sports as well. If you want to see more of me and this show, check out the GSMC Sports Network channel and the GSMC Podcast Network channel on YouTube for YouTube Shorts that are posted daily on there, full live shows that are recorded and published on there as well, or individual segment videos if you want to rewatch a certain segment, or if you missed a segment that you want to rewatch or go catch up on. They're all on the channels, both channels as well. Tune in every weekday as usual at 6:30 p.m. Eastern Time for more NFL discussions, conversations, and a wide variety of topics with me, your host, Manny Maradiegue. Wishing you guys all an awesome weekend. I'll see you guys all on Monday.
Let's go. I wake up to a little bit of drool on my pillow, feel like it's gonna be a bad day. Yeah, I'm tired of shit, and the coffee ain't hit yet. Damn, ain't that great. I don't wanna go to